Hello, this is Jerry Smith, Viper Sales Engineer at ThreatTrack Security, and in this video we're going to do a full tour of the Viper Business Premium Management Console for version 7 as if we're doing a live demonstration. I'm also going to show you a little bit about version 7.5, which is currently in beta. There's a couple new features I want to show you, so let's go ahead and get going. So this is the management console. When you first install Viper, you'll have an icon on your desktop that looks like this nice little snakehead shield here. Just double click that and this is what opens up. This is your Viper Premium Console dashboard. Okay, so the dashboard holds some really great information for you regarding the status of the services running on your server as well as the status of the agents. All right, so this is a fresh install. This is actually the 7.5 beta version. And as you can see, my beta key is about to expire here. I'm getting a nice warning from this widget. These widgets are not the only ones that are available. If you right click here and click on Configure Dashboard, you can see that there are more widgets that can be added here, and we can actually move these widgets around inside of the dashboard space if we like. Just grab it from the bottom and I can truck it around and put it anywhere I want. Let me show you a different console that has a bunch more on it. In fact, we're going to do most of the tour through this console here. This is the current version 7.0.3.12, and again, next version being 7.5 coming out fairly soon. Again, currently in beta. We've got a little bit more. I've added a few more widgets in here. The nice pie chart for the threat definitions that are installed. Nice visual here, as well as the agent breakdown. I wanted to show you the other things that you can see here in the dashboard as well. The first thing I want to show you, and you might have noticed that because it's fairly predominant, is the site navigator. Now, a site in Viper is going to be defined as a single instance of the Viper Management Console installation along with the database and the site that it creates. So the site is the database of computers with agents that have been deployed to them as well as the policies that are contained therein. But I can connect to other sites from one server. So if you have multiple servers that are installed, as you can see here, I've got a second site listed here. This is another server that I have installed, actually. So I've been able to connect through that. And I can do that through the site manager here. All I have to do is click Add and give it the server name and any credentials, and we can connect to the other site. All right? So each site has its own policies. And these policies are what dictate how the agent works and how the agent or what features are enabled in the agent, as well as what kind of user interaction you would like to allow for your end users. Now, when you first install Viper, there are some built-in policies here for you. Okay, so you've got a default policy, a default for laptops, default for Hyper-V, etc. Now, these default policies have what we consider to be best practices configurations for the different types of devices. And we recommend that you use these default policies as templates because, as you can see, if you right click on one of these, we can actually copy the policy and even export it or import it into another console if you like. So what I've done with this other server here is I've copied the default policies and created policies of my own. And again, these policies are what dictate how the agents work. Now, let me show you some more stuff in the dashboard here. We can actually see a list of computers that I have deployed Viper agents to. I can see all kinds of great information regarding these agents as well. Are they currently protected? What is their status? Are they shut down, not communicating, need reboot, etc. Right? I can see what policy they're in. I can sort by these things. I can actually drag one of these columns up into this header here and sort in that way as well if I like. See? I can just tree those out. Right, let me slide that back in there. See how easy that is. There's a few other pieces of information we like to have too. What version of the definitions are we on? When was the last scan done? And some other really good information. There are, of course, more columns that can be added in here. We just open up the column chooser. We can stretch this out, and as you can see, there are more columns that can be added in, and we can actually go ahead and drag and drop these columns into the dashboard as well. So we get up-to-date real-time data regarding the status of our agents here. Another quick thing I want to show you here real fast here. If I right-click in here, I can actually print what's on this screen. So I can print whatever grid is available right here. I wanted you to also see that I can interact with the agents right here from the agent catalog, right? So I can give the agent some commands. I can tell it to do its hello call. I can tell it to check for policy updates. I can ping the agent directly from here if I like, right? And that'll give us a response down here, right? I can do some other things here as well. I can tell it to shut down the agent. I can tell it to reboot the computer. I can tell the agent to look for some updates. If I want to do some agent software updates, I can schedule those from here if I like. And I can tell the agent to look for threat definition updates. I can get details about the agent. I'll show you that in a second. I can tell the agent to do some scans from here, right? A deep scan or a quick scan, or I can pause or resume or abort a scan that might be running, right? I can do some patch management stuff, policy assignment, dispositioning, a few other things here I can do. And not only can I do that with just one single agent, I can do it with multiple agents. So I can control select, or I can shift select and send these commands to multiple agents if I like. So I can interact with all of my agents from the dashboard. I want to show you that agent details screen here real quickly. That shows us stuff about the agent. What's the operating system, status, etc. Scan summary information, anything in the quarantine, the scan history, etc. Okay, all kinds of great information here. We can also see computers that Viper has found that do not currently have a Viper Business Agent installed on them. That's right. Viper has the ability to find computers that do not currently have a Viper Business Agent installed on them, and we can actually install directly from here if you want. Now let me go ahead and go into a little bit of the installation options here. So if Viper's found a machine, we can just click Install Now right here, and I can tell it what policy I want to use for the agent and what type of agent we want to use. A quick note about this. If you have the Viper Premium version, all right, Viper Business Premium, you can actually use both non-premium and premium agents, right? That does not apply if you have the non-premium version. You'd only be able to use non-premium agents. But in the premium version of Viper, you can, of course, again, use both versions of the agent if you like, right? There are other ways to install agents as well. We can run through an agent installation wizard here. We can just open this up, tell it what kind of agent we want or what kind of computer or device we want to install an agent on, right? We tell it what policy we want to use, right? So I can select my policy here. I'm going to go with one of these. Now I want to show you something here real quick. Viper has the ability to remove incompatible software. In other words, we can remove your old antivirus or anti-malware product. As you can see, there's a complete list here of different products that we are currently able to remove, right? If you don't see your product version in this list in Viper, all you have to do is call support, and they can get that added in there within a few days, right? It's a very short turnaround. So we choose the policy here. We go ahead and click continue. Then we can choose what kind of installation we want to do. Do we want to do a push install from the server? And there are some requirements for that you'll want to take a look at, right? We can create an installation package. Now here, this will create an MSI package, right? And then we can also create a roaming agent installation package as well. I'm going to explain roaming agent installation later, or the roaming agent service later, but I'll show you here the roaming agent installation package. As you can see here, I can actually give it a shelf life, right? And I can dictate how many installations I want to allow with that roaming agent installation package. The next screen just tells us no matter what kind of package we do here or what kind of agent, where we're going to store that package. And the next screen is just, yay, you finished kind of screen. Okay, so I mentioned there are other ways as well. We can go here and we can just create an installation package here if you like, an MSI, an MST, roaming package. We can create a package for the Hyper-V agent here as well. And we can deploy these packages in any other way we want. If you deploy software via group policy, the MSI would work just fine with that. Okay, so there are some other agent installation things that we'll talk about in the process here as I go through the console, but those are the main ways to get agents deployed. when you first install Viper, the first thing that you're going to need to do is configure the server for how the server is going to work. Let me go over to my other server here real quickly, and we'll open that up. We just click on the Site Properties button here, and that gives us our server configuration information. So we plug in our product key here, and that tells us what we're licensed for. Right? We can enable that unprotected computer discovery here. It is enabled by default. Right? So we just check that box there and tell it what domains we want to look in. Right? We can, again here, this is the premium version, so I can tell it here that I'd like to also go ahead and download for use possibly the non-premium agent. Agent installation credentials here. This is where we need credentials for agent installation, and we can actually plug in as many sets of credentials as we like here. The roaming agent installation here, this is where roaming agent installation packages will be displayed if you create any, actually. And I have one over here on this server. I have created some roaming agent installation packages. Another real quick note on these, I can actually extend or deactivate these packages right from here if I need to. So in extending also includes shortening the shelf life too. So if I want it to expire tomorrow, right after I created it, I certainly could. And I can up or lower the number of installations I want to allow with that. Let me go ahead and keep clicking through here. Automatic policy assignment is available too. There are a couple of conditions in which you will not have a policy specified for an agent that's being installed onto a computer. Sometimes that is in part of a server migration, process, etc. And there are other conditions as well. But here we can actually dictate what policy we would like certain types of devices to go into by default if a policy is not pre-selected. Okay. Now the update screen has to do with how the server, or tells the server how and when to download updates for threat definitions as well as for the agent software. As you can see here, I'm using the premium and the non-premium agent. I also have some legacy agent capabilities here as well. By default, we're downloading threat definitions every hour here on the server. Now, I will tell you here that we do between 15 and 20 threat definition updates per day, sometimes more. One of the first threat definition updates in the early hours of the day is going to be a full threat definition package, right? And that's going to weigh currently about 136 megabytes. Okay, the rest of the threat definition updates during the day are what we call incremental updates, and those are quite a bit smaller, in the 5 to about 75 kilobyte range. I've seen bigger, I've seen smaller, but again, in kilobytes. Right? I've seen as many as 24 updates a day as well. You can also tell it, the server, to download updates at certain times of day if you like. Now that's done on a 24-hour clock here, but you can add as many times of day if you like, or we actually recommend the default setting of once per hour. We can do manual downloads of the agent software and threat definitions here by clicking these buttons as well. If you'd like to receive any kind of email notifications from Viper regarding anything that Viper may have found, right, as a result of a scan or anything like that, here's where you plug in your from information in order to receive those updates. If the Viper server needs any proxy settings in order to reach our licensing and update servers, here's where you plug that in. Viper has the ability to create and utilize firewall templates in the policies. So here's where you can create and store firewall templates. If you'd like to create any type of console security configuration, we can do that here. As you can see, I've added a user in and limited his capabilities. He's got read-only access for the site. So for this server configuration we're going through right here, if this person logs into this server, he will not be able to change these configurations, right? Because he's got read-only. In addition, I've limited the policies that he can see and or interact with. So he can't even see the policies that say none on them, and he cannot change any of the policies that say read-only. For the read-writes, he can change those and manage those as he likes. The advanced settings page tells you where we store the volatile data as well as the database, and we do ship with an internal database currently using SQLite. You can use full-blown SQL if you like, or SQL Express. All you have to do is point at your SQL server, right? Viper will set up the database for you. You don't have to create the database. It will set it up and provide you with access, right? Now, the next thing we want to do, this is all you need to do to configure the server itself. So the next thing we'll do is we will configure our policies to be used on the computers that we're going to deploy agents to. And as I mentioned earlier, you can copy one of these default policies and then modify policy settings to suit your needs. Now, I've done that, and I'm going to go ahead and show you one of my policies here. I've already got the policy properties open, but you can actually just right-click on that to open it. Right, click on policies here. You can double left-click it, etc., and that'll open the policy as well. So let me go ahead and do that for you. Once we open up the policy, you can see that we have some really great information here. We can allow certain interactions by the end user. We can show a taskbar icon. We can allow the user to run manual scans or manage their scan history. We can even allow the user to manage their own quarantine. Now, we don't recommend this, but certainly doable if you like. Let me show you what the other console looks like, because this is one of the places where we have a change. And that's over here. Let me go ahead and minimize that, open up the policy properties. That's just a little bit different. Now we're actually able to say in version 7.5 if we want to allow the user to open Viper from the icon below in their system tray at all. And if so, what do we want to allow them to do? Right? As in the old in version 7.5 has the ability to protect the agent from uninstallation. We can do that in one of two ways. We can hide it from the installed programs list, or we can protect it with a password. Right? I'll go ahead and go back to my other server here. Right? The user prompts page has to do with messages from Viper. Now, the balloon messages can be quite verbose or wordy. So we disable that by default, right? There are occasions when Viper will need to reboot the computer that it's on. So there is a prompt that is given to the end user. You can change the message in the prompt to whatever you like, but this is the standard or default message that the end user receives, and they do receive a prompt on their end that says, reboot now or reboot later. If there is reason to believe that there will not be somebody sitting at that desk, at that computer, to click the reboot now, we can actually give it an automatic response here. We can check this box to say in 5 minutes that machine is going to automatically reboot if nobody responds. We do disable the Windows Defender upon installation of the agent, and we integrate into the Windows Security Center so that we can report to Windows that there is, in fact, an antivirus product installed. There's some data retention configuration we can do here for the agent. Updates on the agent or in the policy dictate how the agent receives updates. Okay, so we don't find that we have to throttle the update information very often, but we do actually put a 100 millisecond break between every 64 kilobyte chunk in updates if they get to be that big. So also threat definitions. This is checked by default. By default, I believe the threat definition setting here or download is the periodicity is in every 3 hours. I changed mine to every 1 hour to match up with the server. Also, by default, this box right here is not checked in a policy. So, and I've checked this for mine. And this basically tells the agent to download the threat definitions via the internet if for some reason the local Viper server is not available. So if somebody accidentally trips on the cable in the server room for the Viper server and it becomes unplugged, or if that Viper server goes down for some reason or another, this agent is still able to pull its threat definitions because now it's just going to go to the internet for them instead of the server. Right? So we can disable that automatic definition update before the scan if we want. Also, we can enable or disable the automatic check for software updates. Right? Now, this is checked by default, and it will cause the agent to look for new versions of the software on the server every 8 hours. A quick note about that. We only do agent software updates about once per quarter, if that. Right? So I don't necessarily need to check for them that often. In addition, also, keep this in mind. If this is checked, if there is a new version of the agent software available on the server, it will automatically update. It's not going to ask you if you want to update. It's just going to do it. Okay, so if you don't want the potential reboot from a software update, and that doesn't happen all the time, but if we make a drastic change in a driver, for instance, there will be a reboot. If you don't want that reboot to occur automatically, then we can affect that here. There's some other stuff we can see here too, or configure. The communication stuff, the defaults are really great for most environments. So we have a heartbeat status time interval here every 5 minutes. You can up that if you have larger networks, but we recommend definitely contacting support to get their advice on changing that heartbeat status, right? Also, we have a setting here that allows us to remove the agent from the agent catalog if the agent doesn't communicate with the server in X amount of time. Okay. Also, the server IP address is what's filled in here by default when you install Viper, and you can change this to anything you need it to be. Notice I have a separate box here for policy server and update server, so that if I want to have one single central server that handles my policy configurations or policies, while I have multiple distributed update servers for threat definitions, I can definitely do that. So by policy, I can point to the machines, or I can point the machines that are being governed by this policy to a different server for threat definition updates if I want. Now, if I use a fully qualified domain name or a public IP address in this box, if I change those, and if I have this port open on my gateway and I have port forwarding set up, I can allow that agent, if it goes off-site, to communicate with the Viper server. However, this is no longer necessary with the advent of the roaming agent service, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more in depth now. So the roaming agent service allows us to be able to install and manage a Viper agent on a computer that is either sometimes or rarely or never on the same local area network as the Viper server. So for an example, if you have somebody that travels a lot with a laptop and you've got a Viper agent installed on that laptop, right? While that laptop is in the office, it's going to communicate with the Viper server. It wants to do that by default. That's its preference, right? If you have this checkbox checked to allow for roaming, and that laptop leaves the network because that user is going traveling out of town, right? The communication link will still be held. Now, it's initially going to try to communicate with the server. When it realizes it can't, it's going to communicate with the server via the Viper roaming service. Now, that Viper roaming service exists in our servers, in our cloud, if you will. I call this cloud-assisted agent management. All right, so now, while the laptop is away from the office, it's going to send its information up to the Viper roaming service in our clouds, and that is going to be sent down to the server. Or the server actually will call into the Viper roaming service every 5 minutes to find out if there were any status updates from the agent or send any deferred work up for the agent, right? Now, that communication link is provided over HTTPS, so it is secure. So you do not have to poke a hole in your firewall for this port or set up port forwarding, right? We just use the Viper roaming service, again, over HTTPS. Now, if the agent needs proxy settings in order to reach or communicate with either the ThreatTrack servers for threat definition updates, here's where we set that up. Right? If you need any power settings because it is a laptop, here's where we can configure that. Let's move on into scanning, because that's the main reason we have an antivirus product in the first place. We can scan in several different ways, and this has to do with your on-demand scanning. So the initial settings, or the primary settings here, allow us to be able to tell the end user whether or not we want them to be able to scan something by right-clicking in Windows Explorer. If you right-click and say scan with Viper, that's what this checkbox is for. We can also scan USB drives upon insertion. We can disable that if you like, right? And we can randomize or disable the startup scans as well. Right? Now we have two different types of scans that are built in for you here. We have a deep scan and a quick scan. Now the deep scan will scan all local drives and will run at a normal priority, while the quick scan will scan only the most common threat locations and it'll run at a low priority. Keep in mind, however, If you change this quick scan to scan all local drives, you've really basically turned it into a deep scan. So we recommend leaving these settings over here on the right in both the deep scan and the quick scan alone, and schedule as needed. Right? Now, if you want to make any wild and wacky changes over here, utilize your custom scan capabilities, right? So you have the ability to create as many custom scans as you like, with only one caveat being, of course, and this should be obvious, that you can't run multiple scans on the same machine at the same time. There's only one scanning engine, right? Set those up as often as you like, and tweak your options here. And notice this Viper Rapid Scan option. This gives Viper the ability to scan only the things that have changed since the last full scan process. Here's a quick example. Let's say you ran a deep scan this morning when the computer's turned on before your users got in, but you want to run a really rapid scan at maybe an hour before lunchtime to scan any maybe documents your users may have downloaded, etc. Right? So that's one use for that. Another type of scanning is what we call on-access scanning, and that's provided by Viper's Active Protection. All right, and this is enabled by default. And what we can do here, what Viper does, is scan files in real time as they're being touched by the end user. We have several levels of aggressiveness with this. Over here to the far right is where Viper will scan every single file that's touched by the end user. Now, we only recommend this setting if you are currently suspecting a possible malware outbreak, because this is very aggressive, and again, we'll scan every single file that's being touched. The opposite end of that spectrum is for Viper to scan only executables when they're initialized. Right? What we recommend is this middle of the road, best of both worlds setting, if you will, right, where we scan these specific file extensions if they're touched by the end user. Now, you can uncheck some of these if you feel confident that, for instance, this particular extension isn't ever going to be malware for you, right? So, or you can add extensions if you don't see an extension in this list. You can give end user control over this. However, we don't recommend this. Right? Because what if they forget to re-enable active protection? Okay. Now, email protection. This is a really neat feature that we have. This gives us the ability to provide you with an additional layer of protection with regard to your email flow. Email is currently the single most commonly used and largest threat vector currently available to hackers and writers of malicious code. Okay, so we can protect your or help you protect your email at the endpoint, at the client. So if your end users are using Outlook or Windows Mail or one of the other email clients, we can actually, what we do is we intercept the email on the inbound and outbound port, and we scan it real quick. If you have the premium version of Viper, you'll see this checkbox here. The non-premium version of Viper will not have this checkbox, as this anti-phishing feature is a premium version feature. Okay, and we can allow end-user control over this. Now, what anti-phishing does is it gives us the ability to recognize links that are embedded in an email that point to known bad websites, and we can strip them out of the email. The remediation configuration is what tells Viper what to do in the event that it does run into some malware. So as you can see here, everything is set by default to quarantine with two exceptions, and that's going to be cookies and the commercial remote control tool. Now, I've gone ahead and changed mine to quarantine, but by default it's actually set to report only. You notice the cookies are set to allow, commercial remote control tool set to report only, and everything else to quarantine. Now, what I did here is I actually added a few tools, a few commercial remote control tools that I might use into my allowed threats list, and I'm going to show you that in a minute, but I wanted to show you something else here real quick first. And that is that I can actually change the default actions in here on the global level here, on the group level, or on the individual level. So there are ways to create exceptions, right? We can block certain things from running if you like. We have to be specific and add in the file and file path, etc., right? We can also do some exclusions. What do we not want Viper to scan? Now, Microsoft has some recommendations with regard to exclusions that you would set up in your antivirus product, some file exclusions, right? We went to, there are KB articles that cover those file exclusions, and we added all these file exclusions in to the default policies for you. Now for the workstation policies, that's a pretty short list. For the server policies, and let me show you this here real quick. As you can see with this drop-down menu, I can bounce around between policies here. Right? So for servers, we have a much longer list of exclusions here. As you can see, I believe there's about 170 exclusions currently. And that includes things for like your Exchange server or your SQL server stuff. Keep in mind that if you have a non-default installation of, say, SQL or Exchange or something like that, these paths may not be accurate for your environment. So you want to double check those and make sure that they are accurate for you. Okay. Now, along the lines of exclusions and exceptions and whatnot, I want to go ahead and take a peek at allowed threats here real quick. Okay. Now, allowed threats are things that Viper would consider to be malware that I'm going to go ahead and allow to run without remediation. Okay, so we have a categorized list of allowed threats. These are, again, pieces of software that might be considered to be malicious, that are categorized in lists for you so that you can find them easily. Things for, browser plugins, keyloggers, etc. And if there are products like these that you'd like to be able to allow one end user or a few end users to use, you can add those into the policy here under allowed threats, and Viper will not remediate them. Okay. Now, if you want to receive email alerts from Viper, let me minimize a couple things to make some space here for this tree. We can actually configure that here too. So by policy, you remember in the site properties, we configured the from information. Who will you receive these email alerts from? We configure the to information, the recipient information, in the policy, right? So different policies could have different recipients for these email alerts. And I can plug in as many email addresses as I'd like here, but if Viper finds something as a result of a scan or is on access scanning and it either allowed or blocked, or in its email protection, here's where we fill in the recipients for that. Okay. Now, I wanted to point out one other thing here real quick. I showed you the drop-down menu so I can bounce around between policies, but I also wanted to show you here real quick that if I make a change to a policy, I can click on this Copy To button here and propagate those changes to other policies. Okay. Now, we're moving into what's left here is premium version features. Okay, so here we have the web filtering, and I've allowed the user to manage this, and that comes under the firewall configuration here, right? Let me go ahead and switch back to my workstation policy here. Now, if I check on this box, that changes that to user managed, and it also affects the web filtering, right? So we can allow the end user to manage their firewall and web filtering if we want, okay? We can enable that web filtering, and again, what we're doing here is just identifying and blocking malicious websites, okay? We can actually block specific websites if you like. I've added in Twitter and Facebook and the upper level domains for China and Russia just for fun, right? And we can create a list of allowed websites. In other words, if there is a known bad website that Viper will block access to, right, but you want to allow a user or more users to access that site, we can add those sites in here. Let's get into the firewall here. We can configure, again, user control over the firewall. We can configure some advanced stuff here on the firewall as well. So as we take a look at the firewall configurations, note that the firewall is not enabled by default. Okay, so we have to check this box in order to turn it on. We don't want to start blocking things before you've had a chance to configure your firewall, right? And again, we can allow some different user interaction here. We can log packets and port scans. We can do some application exceptions, network protocol exceptions. We can do some advanced exceptions here by protocol and port. We have some IDS capabilities in the form of snort rules. We can configure trusted zones for Viper. We can enable process and boot time protection. Boot time protection blocks any kind of connection attempt during the boot up of the operating system. And we can do some code injection configuration as well here. if we like. And here's where we can assign those firewall templates if we wanted to make those from the site properties. Patch management is another premium version feature, right? So I'll just expand this out. Let's take a look at the scheduling first here. We can schedule the scan for patches to occur, and we can schedule the patch installation if we like as well. I leave that unchecked by default for myself, right? So this list here will tell us what patches might be missing. If I open up another policy here, I know I've got a policy that shows that I've got some patches that are needed. Here we go. Here's some patches that are needed for some machines, and I can actually individually approve these. Also, I can take a look at all the different patches as well. Here are the different products that we're scanning for updates for currently. I will let you know that we don't automatically patch Java by default. We don't want to break something that you might be working with an internal or proprietary piece of software inside of your environment. So you'll want to take a look at that, okay? But this tells us what products we're looking for patches for. We can manage those patches individually here by clicking on this button here. And we can also tell the operating system here to turn on Windows automatic updates if that is allowed by group policy or security policy on the computer. Now, I can install these patches manually as well. If I want to just go ahead and approve this patch here, I can go back to the agent catalog and I can right click on this agent and I can say install the approved patches. Okay, let's go back to the policy here. And that is the rest of the premium version features here. This final piece of configuration is not a premium version feature. This is available in both versions. Here we can enable automatic agent installation if we want, right? And it talks about, of course, the incompatible software removal, right? And we can dictate which type of or which version of the agent we want to deploy. We can find computers for this policy, for agents to be deployed with this policy via Active Directory query here. As you can see, I've got a bunch of machines. I could add in a list of computer names if I like. I can add in an IP range or a subnet, and I can even include exclusions from that subnet, right? So for this policy, I've got configured, automatic agent installation. Agents that are found in this IP range or subnet will receive an agent and use this policy, right? And then more information on the incompatible software removal. Here's the list that we've seen a couple times, and here we can actually disable that if we like. Okay. Now I want to show you real quickly some other policies that we have as well. As you may have noticed here in the console, we have policies for Hyper-V, for Mac agents, for iOS and Android devices as well. Let me show you those here real quick. Let's take a look at the default for Mac first. A little bit less than a Windows agent. We can show that taskbar icon. We can do some data retention stuff, determine when we pull updates and how we communicate with the server, right? We can do some scanning settings here, right? We can set up a deep scan. We can set up remediation just like we do in a Windows policy. We can set up some exceptions, again, just like we do in a Windows policy. We can set up email alerts, and we have an allowed threats list as well. For Hyper-V, we'll take a look at the default policy for that. Again, we can do some agent communication stuff here. We can set up the scanning stuff. We can tell it to remove the Hyper-V snapshot. Let me give you a quick rundown on how the Hyper-V agent works. The Hyper-V agent is installed on the Hyper-V server host, and it protects all the virtual machines on that Hyper-V server. And it does so by taking a snapshot of those virtual machines and scanning the snapshot. It will then remediate the snapshot if any remediation is necessary. A reboot will be required to complete the remediation because the snapshot is then switched with the live running VHD. Okay. Any additional questions, give us a buzz into support anytime. We can set up a full scan. We can do incremental scans. It'll take a second snapshot and compare the two snapshots and scan what was different. Right? And we can enable active protection as well. Now, if you enable active protection, right, this results in the installation of a very, very small active protection agent on the virtual machine to provide that on-access scanning capabilities. Again, if you have any questions about that, give us a buzz into support. We'll be happy to help you out. Right? We can create exceptions, of course. We can block and exclude stuff. We can do some scanning alerts here, and we can do some allowed threats. Right, we also have the Android and iOS policies. For Android, we do have a scanning agent that we can deploy here, right? So we can tell it when we want to do scans. We can do some passcode parameters here. So if we want to insist on a passcode in order to access the device, here's how that is done. And if we want to send Wi-Fi network information to the device without having it to, give it to the end user on a post-it note or via email or ever at all, right? We can just send it directly to the device, and we plug in the SID and WebKey here, and that gets sent right directly over to the device. We can do something similar for iOS devices. We can do the passcode and Wi-Fi network information stuff. Now I do want to go ahead and show you real quick an Android device that I've got here in my Android policy, and I believe that's going to be here. Yes, I've got this Android device here, and if we look at the agent details, there are a couple things I can do for this device in case it's lost. I can sound an alarm on the device, I can lock the device, I can do a factory reset on the device, clear the passcode, and I can even find this device. Again, different types of policies for different types of machines, and there you have that. Now, one other piece I'd like to go ahead and show you, and that is the report viewer. Viper is able to do some reporting. All we have to do is click on the report viewer button here, and that will open up the report viewer. And as you can see, there are some reports that I can create here that are built in for you. And I can run those reports manually right here. All I have to do is click on the preview button, select a report, modify any kind of stuff here, and then click preview, and that report will open up right here in front of us. I can also schedule reports to run. As you can see here, I can make a little bit of modification with regard to the information I want to show. I can dictate what the range or the time frame I want to report on. Right? How often I want to report. If I want to run a report every Monday, for instance, I can run an agent scan by policy report or whatever other report. I can give it another name if I want, right? And I can dictate the reporting format. And you have about 8 different formats that you can create these reports in. And I can decide whether or not I want to just save that report to disk or email that report to several different recipients. Okay. So that is all of the Viper Management Console for version 7. I do want to go back and show you the new feature that's going to be available in version 7.5, and that is removable device control. As you can see here, this list of devices kind of resembles the Windows Device Manager, right? So you can select these different types of devices. If I double left click on one of these things, I can go ahead and configure some control over this. So I can either allow full access or I can block all access to these types of devices. Right? I can give it a name for this particular rule. I can actually point at specific devices by either model or serial number if I like. And I can add this rule to users or groups in Active Directory as well. Also, if I like, I can enforce the use of password protected encryption on data that gets transferred to these different types of devices. Right? And I can allow end users to request temporary access, and I can grant that temporary access. Now, give us a buzz if you have any other questions about this. Definitely you can call into support or call your salesperson. I'll have some information up here for you in a second as far as who you can contact. But at any time, if you do have any questions, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email anytime. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy Viper.